While the leaders of the Nazi regime organized deportations and signed murder orders, their wives remained by their side, in charge of sustaining daily life. They attended to guests, raised children in homes full of objects sent from the front, and shared celebrations with those who directed mass executions. Some traveled to occupied zones, others stayed in homes provided by the party, keeping everything silent. They knew the names, the positions and the plans, even if they did not wear uniforms. When the Reich collapsed, many disappeared from reports and passed the years without being named. Some were left alone, others changed cities or started anew without leaving traces. What happened to the women who shared table, bed and routine with the men who led Nazism? The first of them was Gertrude Scholz-Klink. She came into the world in February of 1902, when Germany was still facing the consequences of having lost the Great War. She was raised in a modest home, where from a young age she was taught to follow rules and fulfill her responsibilities. In 1929, while radical ideas gained ground throughout the country, she made the decision to join the National Socialist Party. Although the view of women was very limited, her determination allowed her to advance within the organization. Her rise was rapid, and in 1933, she already held the leadership of the party's women's group. From that position, she promoted an image of women focused on motherhood, obedience to the regime, and homemaking. The rules imposed by the authorities completely changed the course of many lives. Some women had to leave their jobs as doctors or lawyers to stay at home. For her, that was a form of ideological triumph. When the conflict broke out in 1939, conflicts began with what she had defended. The lack of labor forced many women to return to factories and fields, something that went against what she had promoted. Despite that, her stance remained firm. In December of 1940, she married August Heismeyer, who was a high-ranking SS officer. Between the two of them, they had 10 children from previous relationships. Their home was used as an example in the regime's media to showcase the kind of family unit they wanted to promote. As time passed and the war situation worsened, the outlook became more difficult. In May of 1945, when Allied troops were about to take Berlin, everything she knew began to collapse. The end of the regime was imminent, and danger grew. She was captured by Soviet forces and sent to a prisoner camp. However, she managed to escape and hid in Babenhausen, where she received help from members of the local aristocracy. They spent 3 years hidden under false names to avoid being recognized. But in February of 1948, the situation took a turn. She was arrested and brought to justice for using falsified documents, and received a sentence of 1.5 years. Later, the committee in charge of evaluating responsibility within the old regime increased her sentence to 2.5 years, and she was prohibited from participating in political activities. Upon regaining freedom in 1953, she chose to stay out of the public eye. She remained in Babenhausen and avoided reappearing, although her way of thinking did not change. In 1978, she published a book where she maintained her vision on the role of women under the regime, reaffirming the same ideas she had defended since the 1930s. During the 1980s, she gave some interviews in which she tried to explain the role of women in that era. She passed away on the 24th of March of 1999. She was 97 years old. Another of those women was Hedwig. Hedwig Hoss was born on the 3rd of March 1908 in Neukirch in the Lausitz region. She was the wife of Rudolf Hoss, commander of the Auschwitz concentration camp. She was the daughter of Ostwald Richard Hensel and Lina Florendine Kremtz. She had a brother named Gerhard Fritz, who became a painter and also a sister. She married Rudolf Hoss on the 17th of August 1929. He had been released from prison 1 year earlier, after having served almost 5 years for killing a comrade from the Rossbach paramilitary group. Although the sentence was for 10 years for homicide and assault, he was pardoned in July 1928. Both were part of the Arteman League, a radical group linked to the National Socialist Youth Movement, which would later join the party's youth organizations in 1934. When they married, Hedwig was already expecting her first child, Klaus, who was born on a newly acquired farm in Salentine, Pomerania. The couple had 5 children. In 1940, they moved into a house that had belonged to a Polish officer, finished just before the start of the conflict. They lived there for 3 years, next to Auschwitz I. The garden of that house directly abutted the camp wall. From the upper floors, the crematoria and barracks could be seen. "Rudolf calls me the Queen of Auschwitz," Hedwig told her mother Lina one day, who came to visit her from Berlin. The garden made an impression on her. Hedwig had worked hard on it, with the help of Polish gardeners and landscapers who had been taken from the camp. The ashes of incinerated bodies served as fertilizer. "Children, rinse the strawberries well to remove the ashes," Hedwig would say, as recalled by Leopold Hager, Rudolf's driver. The care Hedwig devoted to that garden showed her place within the model of territorial occupation promoted by the regime. For her, that land was part of the ideological plan of expansion, which used agriculture as a basis to justify the forced taking of space. She and Rudolf preferred their servants to be Jehovah's Witnesses because they considered them obedient and reliable. They used between 15 and 20 detainees for tasks such as cooking, sewing, gardening, hairdressing, surveillance, or childcare. They even built a wooden airplane for the children to push around the garden. They also supervised the pool when children from the neighborhood came over. One of the prisoners assigned to their house was Sophie Stippel, who had known Rudolf since they were small in Mannheim. She recognized him on the camp ramp in March 1942, and from then on she worked there as a cook and nanny. She wore the number 619. During the time they lived in Auschwitz, Hedwig hired 2 Polish seamstresses to alter clothes taken from the bodies. Furthermore, she ordered a sewing workshop to be set up inside the camp, where female prisoners made garments for the wives of SS personnel. In his memoirs, Rudolf wrote about his life in that house. "My family was happy in Auschwitz. My wife and children had everything they wanted. The children played calmly. My wife had her garden. The prisoners behaved well with them and were respectful. I am sure that no former prisoner can say that they were mistreated in our house. My wife wanted to help all the prisoners who dealt with us." Stanislav Dubel, who worked as a gardener from April 1942, gave his testimony at Rudolf's trial in 1947. He recounted that during Himmler's first visit to the camp, he greeted Rudolf and Hedwig kindly, picked up the children, and they called him Uncle Heini. These images were hung in large format on the walls of the house. When they received guests, Hedwig organized meals and asked Dubel to obtain the products. She did not give him money or rationing coupons. He had to obtain everything illegally. He did so through a friend named Adolf Maciejowski, who was a capo in a camp warehouse and who put him in contact with the person in charge, an SS man named Schebeck. Dubel also said that Hedwig replaced her employees' underwear with clothes taken from the belongings of murdered women. According to him, she despised Poles and said they were there to work until they were exhausted. In 1942, Rudolf began a relationship with a prisoner named Nora Mataliano Hodis. When she became pregnant, she was locked in a cell. The SS judge, Konrad Morgan, who investigated abuses, believed that Rudolf had given the order to worsen her conditions so that she would die without the pregnancy being known. After being released, Nora lost the baby. Morgan took her to a clinic in Munich to recover and interrogated her in October 1944. That same year, he confronted her with Rudolf, who denied having given that order. The investigation was stopped by Himmler. Years later, Morgan repeated the accusation during the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt. When the regime collapsed, Rudolf escaped to Flensburg in May 1945 with the help of an underground network. Hedwig and her children were hidden in a sugar factory in St. Michaelisdonn. Rudolf adopted the false name of Franz Lang and enlisted in the Navy. He was found thanks to a British group led by Hans Alexander, a young Jew who had fled to England. They threatened Hedwig with sending her son Klaus to Siberia. That is how she gave Rudolf's location. He was arrested on the 11th of March 1946 in Gottrupel, where he worked as a gardener. He testified in the main trials and was then handed over to the Polish authorities. He was tried between the 11th and the 29th of March 1947. He was executed by hanging on the 16th of April in the same camp he had commanded. In 1964, during the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt, Hedwig stated that she lived as a housewife in Ludwigsburg and did not remember what happened in Auschwitz. During the first years after the conflict, the couple's children did not know where their father was. Klaus took his mother and siblings to Stuttgart and then went to Australia with his wife Lisolette. There he worked for an airline and died of alcoholism in early 1986. Inga Brigitte trained as a milliner and moved to Spain during the Franco regime. There she was discovered as a model by Balenciaga, met her future American husband, moved to the United States, and worked in a clothing store in Washington, D.C. She ended up living in Arlington. In an interview on the 16th of December 2021, she said that her father had been a good father, and that according to her mother, he was a very sad man. Hans-Jürgen became a Jehovah's Witness, distanced himself from his family, and married Irena Pauli, a woman of good economic standing from the Stuttgart area. They had 2 children, Kai, born in 1962, and Rainer. Hans-Jürgen lived in a house near the Baltic Sea until he passed away. Kai lives in a rural area near Stuttgart with his wife Rahma, born in the Philippines, whom he met in Indonesia. They have 4 children. Hedwig passed away on the 15th of September 1989 at her daughter Inga Bridget's home in Arlington. She was cremated and buried without a name in a local cemetery. Only one word appears on the tombstone: Mom. One more within that circle was Emmy Goering. She was a renowned theatre actress before becoming the wife of Hermann Goering, one of the most visible men of the Third Reich. Born in Hamburg in 1902, her career as a performer began on German stages during the 1920s. She had presence, a firm voice, and elegant gestures. She worked in important theatres and received praise for her talent. During a presentation in Berlin, she met Goering. He was already a key figure in the rise of Nazism. The relationship was fast. They became engaged in a short time and married in 1935 with a high-profile ceremony. The wedding was one of the social events most covered by the regime's official press. Hitler attended as a witness. There were parades, musicians, photographs distributed throughout the country. Emmy became, from that moment, a recognizable figure. The media called her the First Lady of the Reich. Her role was symbolic. She did not participate in decisions or appear in political speeches, but her image was present at public celebrations and events with diplomats. She lived with Goering in Karinhall, a residence built in the middle of the forest, designed to reflect power and wealth. The place had rooms decorated with antique tapestries, high ceilings, display cases full of official gifts, and a collection of art plundered from different countries. Emmy organized receptions, received international visitors, and supervised the details of the protocol. She wore German designer suits, used jewelry brought from Vienna, and spoke several languages fluently. Her function was to receive, accompany, and show the friendly face of the regime. The place also functioned as a stage. Family photos were taken there, formal dinners were held, and movies were projected. Emmy had her routine. She walked the gardens in the morning, reviewed menus with the kitchen staff, and prepared for the day's activities. Her agenda included engagements with ambassadors, wives of generals, and representatives of party organizations. Over time, tensions arose between her and Eva Braun. Although Eva was Hitler's private partner, she had no official title. Emmy, on the other hand, was the wife of the second most powerful man in the Reich. At public events, she was expected to maintain a protocolary distance from Eva. However, backstage there were frictions. Emmy referred to Eva with a certain condescension, and that was recorded by some witnesses from the inner circle. Comparisons between the two were frequent. One had official status, the other was in the shadows. That tension was maintained until the end of the regime. Despite the war situation, life in Karinhall remained surrounded by luxuries. Banquets, private concerts, and theatrical performances were organized. Emmy took care of every detail. She checked the lighting, the seating arrangement, and the quality of the food. In the eyes of visitors, the environment showed order and abundance. During diplomatic visits, she smiled, spoke courteously, and represented the image of German refinement. She had one daughter with Goering, whom she raised within the walls of Karinhall. The girl attended private lessons and was kept out of the regime's affairs. Emmy avoided exposing her to military matters. She preferred to maintain the domestic routine. She prepared gifts, chose books, decorated the room with fresh flowers. Although party reports spoke of efficiency and obedience, at home Emmy focused on maintaining the image of a stable family. In the last months of the regime, when defeat was evident, Karinhall was evacuated. Emmy and her daughter left the residence with the help of close associates. There was no public scene. They moved in silence with minimal escort. Documents indicate that they tried to hide in Bavaria. There they were located by Allied forces. Emmy was arrested along with her young daughter. She did not resist. She carried few belongings, one handbag, some photos, and one blanket. She was transferred to an internment camp where she remained for several months. During the denazification process, her name appeared on lists, but she was not brought to formal trial. She declared that her role had been solely social. She stated that she had no knowledge of crimes or access to military information. Her testimony focused on her role as a mother and hostess. The authorities accepted that version, and she was released under surveillance. In the 1950s, Emmy reappeared at local events. She gave some interviews in which she spoke of her past life without going into detail. She mentioned the theatre, her memories in Carron Hall, and her husband as a complex figure. She never showed remorse. She spoke calmly, avoided difficult questions, and focused on personal aspects. She lived in relative anonymity without returning to the stage. Over the years, her presence was reduced to archival images and sporadic mentions. The objects she once used were packed and stored. Carron Hall, the residence that symbolized the splendor of power, was demolished before falling into Allied hands. Today, no material trace of the place remains. Only photographs survive where Emmy appears in spacious rooms, in formal attire and with a contained expression, toasting or handing flowers to visitors. Her career did not have abrupt ruptures or public scandals. She was part of the regime from the comfort of protocol and faded with it in silence. Her daughter adopted another name and left the country. Emmy did not appear in events again, nor did she accept interviews. She passed away in 1987. Another of those wives was Margareta Braun, known as Gretel, who was born in Munich in 1915. She was the youngest of the three Braun sisters, along with Eva and Ilse. Her middle-class family, with traditional Bavarian customs, lived in Ruhpolding, a mountain area in the Bavarian Alps. Her father was named Friedrich Braun and her mother Franziska Kronberger, who worked as a seamstress. When Hitler met Eva Braun in the studio of photographer Heinrich Hoffmann, Gretel was already employed there as an assistant. Hitler arranged for the two sisters to have an apartment in Munich, and over time they began staying for seasons at the Berghof and in Obersalzberg, where the regime leader's retreat was located. Eva became his companion, and Gretel took advantage of that closeness to live a life with all conveniences. Both spent a lot of time together thanks to the benefits they received from Hitler, especially in places like the Berghof, Lake Königssee, and the Königsbach waterfall, which were the landscapes where he usually rested. In May of 1944, Hitler tried to arrange Gretel's marriage to his assistant Fritz Darges, but he chose to go to the Eastern Front rather than commit. Finally, the marriage happened, though with someone else. Unconfirmed comments circulated about Gretel's reputation in Obersalzberg. Some accounts suggested she was pregnant with Darges, although that did not coincide with the date her daughter was born, which was 1 year later. Hitler, who also wanted to show Eva more openly, used Himmler to convince another of his assistants, the high-ranking SS chief Hermann Fegelein, that such a union served his political interests. Fegelein, who had a reputation for climbing the ranks and having many lovers, accepted. Gretel and Fegelein were married on the 3rd of June, 1944 in Salzburg. The celebration was held at the Berghof, with Himmler and Martin Bormann as witnesses, and at that event Hitler officially presented Eva Braun to the guests. When the Third Reich began to collapse, Eva Braun travelled to Berlin to be in the underground bunker with Hitler, and on the 23rd of April, 1945, she asked Gretel, who was still in Berchtesgaden, to burn her documents. On the 29th of April, Gretel's husband, Hermann Fegelein, was executed by Himmler's order after being accused of treason. The next day, Eva, who was already Hitler's wife, ended her life with him. Gretel had a daughter on the 5th of May, 1945, and named her Eva Barbara Fegelein. That daughter committed suicide on the 8th of April, 1971. Gretel married for the second time in February of 1954 to a businessman named Kurt Berlinghoff. She passed away on the 10th of October, 1987 in Steingarten when she was 72 years old. Another figure was Margaret Boden. She was born in Gonkarzewo near Bromberg when that area was still under the control of the German Empire. She was the daughter of Hans Boden, a landowner, and Elfriede Popp. She grew up with 3 sisters and 1 brother. In 1909, she began her studies at a girls' school in Bromberg, and during the Great War, she trained as a nurse and worked in that field. Afterwards, she continued in a hospital under the German Red Cross. Her first marriage was brief and childless. With her father's support, she moved to Berlin and began to run her own private clinic. In 1927, she heard Himmler at a conference. They began to write to each other. In a letter, she called him a hard-hearted soldier, although she liked his writing more than his appearance. Blonde, with light eyes and tidy, she fit his ideal of a woman. Although older by 7 years, both shared tastes such as herbalism and rigid habits. In her letters, Margaret complained about colleagues. In one from June of 1928, she criticized Dr. Hauschild. In July, they married. It was difficult for him to tell his family, as she was Protestant, older, and divorced. No Himmler attended the wedding. The witnesses were her father and her brother. In time, they accepted her, but without closeness. In August of 1929, their daughter Gudrun was born. They also took in the orphan boy Gerhard von Ahe. With the sale of her clinic, they bought a plot of land in Waldtrudering, near Munich, where they erected a prefabricated house. As Himmler was almost never there, she managed everything, including a failed attempt to raise animals. In 1933, when Hitler rose to power, they moved to Mühlstrasse in Munich. Later, they bought a dwelling next to Lake Tegern, which they used as their main residence. Later, they moved to Dahlem in Berlin. The more occupied Himmler was, the less contact he maintained with her. Himmler's elder brother described her as a cold, nervous, and not very affectionate woman, though loyal. Margaret belonged to the Nazi Party since 1928, with the number 97,252. Although the relationship with Himmler cooled, they continued to attend events. They frequently visited the Heydrichs, and she organized meetings with wives of other SS members. She was never well received among the others. Baldur von Schirach said that Himmler lived under pressure at home and met her demands. During the Nuremberg Congress of 1938, she had friction with wives of high-ranking officials. According to Gerwarth, she got along poorly with Lena Heydrich, who years later described her as a rigid woman, without sympathy, who detested open spaces. In 1936, Himmler hired Hedwig Potthast as a secretary. In 1939, they began a relationship. They had 2 children, Helga, born in 1942, and Nanette, in 1944. Margaret, who lived in Gmund, learned of the situation around 1941. They were already living separately, but she chose to stay for her daughter. During the war, she directed Red Cross hospitals. In 1939, she was appointed head of centers in Berlin-Brandenburg, including occupied areas. In March of 1940, she traveled to Poland and left notes about cities like Posen, Łódź, and Warsaw. She commented on the dirt, the disorder, and her contempt for Jews and Poles. For her duties, she received the rank of colonel in the Red Cross. In 1945, she wrote to Gebhard Himmler, valuing her husband's work. She maintained contact with her daughter, who visited her frequently. In April of that year, they met Himmler in Gmund. When the Allied troops advanced, Margaret and Gudrun escaped. In May, they were captured in Bolzano, Italy. They were transferred to various camps in France, Italy, and Germany. She was interrogated, but she did not provide useful information. She always said that she only saw what was happening around her. In September of 1945, she was interrogated in Nuremberg and taken with her daughter to the Flak Kaserne Ludwigsburg camp. They were released in November of 1946. Later, they took refuge in Bethel Bielefeld. Her presence caused controversy. In 1947, the New York Tribune newspaper published a note about her current situation. In 1948, she was considered a minor offender within the denazification process, Category 3. In 1950, she hired a lawyer to appeal. She argued that her affiliation was symbolic and that her position was due to prior nursing experience. She denied having political power. The Detmold court opined that she had supported the regime and Himmler's decisions. Her defense insisted that she was being judged only for having been his wife. In March of 1951, she was reclassified as a passive sympathizer, Category 4. Although she was not held responsible for the crimes, it was concluded that she and her daughter lived with privileges. Therefore, Hans Ehard, Prime Minister of Bavaria, requested a review of the case in the British zone. The focus was on the property in Gmund. On the 15th of January of 1953, it was resolved that Margareta had benefited from the regime. She was placed in Category 2, assigned to active or favoured persons. She was sentenced to 30 days of forced labour, loss of voting rights, and her pension. In 1952, Gudrun left Bethel. In 1955, Margareta moved to Hiepen, where she lived with her sister Lydia and Gerhard. Afterwards, she returned to Munich and lived with her daughter, who always defended her father. Peter Longerich wrote that she probably was unaware of the hidden details of the regime, but her statements showed ideological firmness. Jürgen Matthäus described her as a woman with Nazi convictions and anti-Semitic attitudes. She was not directly linked to the crimes, but she benefited from the system. In her last years, she avoided any public exposure. She lived in silence with Gudrun in Munich. She passed away in 1967 at 74 years of age. Her death went without mention. Her life remained tied to the name of the man with whom she shared her history. Who also remained close to the core of Nazi power from the beginning was Lena Heydrich. Lena was born into a well-off family on the Baltic Sea coast. From a young age, she showed pride in her origin and an early admiration for nationalist ideas. She met Reinhard Heydrich when he was a naval officer removed for a disciplinary offence. They married in 1931. Lena promoted his entry into the Nazi Party and was the one who brought him closer to the SS. Since then, she accompanied his career with total conviction. They lived in different cities until settling in Prague, in a villa confiscated by the regime after the occupation of Czechoslovakia. Lena took care of the home with clear rules, well-behaved children, domestic staff under surveillance, and a social agenda where everything had to be under control. No errors were allowed. She wanted the house to reflect the hierarchy her husband represented in the party. Those who knew her spoke of her dry character, her firm tone, and her unhurried way of walking. She had full confidence in what Heydrich did. She did not question his travels, positions, or functions. She never asked for explanations. It was enough for her to know that he served the state and that her family had to live up to it. She organized meetings, received visitors, answered letters. She took care of every detail of the domestic environment as an extension of political authority. Her children were not treated with sweetness, but with demand. When Heydrich was attacked in Prague in 1942, Lena was informed with few words. She visited him in the hospital while he was still conscious. She did not cry. She stayed by his side in silence. When he died, Lena was treated as a martyr's wife. The regime placed her at the head of the funeral, showed her in parades, and presented her as a symbol of dedication. She accepted the role without hesitation. She returned to Germany shortly after, settling in properties that had been handed over by the party. She was not marginalized. On the contrary, she was maintained with a pension and allowed to live with her children without major restrictions. During the first post-war years, she avoided speaking publicly. But in the following decades, she gave interviews, wrote memoirs, and dedicated herself to clearing her husband's name. She repeated that he was only doing his duty. She denied versions of acts that would compromise the family image. She did not mention victims or decisions made in his name. For many, she was one of the few widows of the regime who never distanced herself from the past. In 1976, she published a book where she stated that she was unaware of the details about the final solution. Lena von Osten passed away in Fehmarn on the 14th of August, 1985. Ilse Hess was part of that same environment. Ilse Pröll was born in northern Germany, into a conservative and religious environment. She met Rudolf Hess when he was already part of Hitler's inner circle. They married in 1927. From the beginning, Ilse knew her life would be marked by politics. She accepted the role without resistance. She remained out of the public spotlight, but with absolute loyalty to her husband and the regime. They lived in Munich and later moved to a more secluded house. Ilse did not get involved in official events, nor did she seek visibility. She was reserved, dedicated to the home, and focused on her son Wolf Rudiger. She preferred to stay out of it. But her correspondence shows that she shared the party's central ideas. She spoke of purity, destiny, and sacrifice with a firm and convinced tone. The night Rudolf Hess flew alone to Scotland in May of 1941, Ilse had no prior warning. She found out from other party members. She did not protest. She said that if he had made that decision, he must have had a reason. In public, she did not speak about the matter. In private, she wrote that she trusted him, that she believed everything would become known in time. She never expressed rejection or doubt. After the fall of the regime, Ilse was arrested by the Allied authorities. She went through interrogations and was detained for a time. She did not deny her relationship or her beliefs. In 1952, she published a book called England, Nuremberg, Spandau, A Destiny in Letters, published by Droffel Verlag, a publishing house close to German nationalism. During those years, she maintained correspondence with several people from the Nazi circle, among them Winifred Wagner, who also retained admiration for Hitler. Ilse Hess died on the 7th of September, 1995, with 95 years, and was buried next to her husband in the city of Wunsiedel in Bavaria.